Video được Việt hóa bởi Ngọc Tân từ group tài nguyên dựng phim. Nghiêm cấm các hành vi lít về rồi bán cho thằng khác. Mọi ý kiến đóng góp xin gửi về Facebook Quỳnh Ngọc Tân.
So let's have a little introduction to the color page, what it's used for, and how it's laid out. In my media pool here, I'm going to go to Chapter 8, Color Page, and open up our Color Page Start timeline just by double-clicking it. And here we have this scene from our film. And to bring this into the color page, all I have to do is have this timeline open and click on the color button down here in the lower part of the interface, and the interface switches to color mode. So let's take a look around, starting with things that are a little bit more familiar. First, in the upper middle part of our interface is our viewer. This works just like the viewer does in all the other pages. And to the left of the viewer, we have the gallery. This is where we're going to save some of our color corrections so that we can bring them up later. More on that in a second. But the buttons here behind the gallery, we have our media pool, which we should be very familiar with. Now, the media pool and the cut page, we don't really import things directly into the cut page very often. And so it's mostly there so that you can navigate to different timelines, in my opinion. But that should be familiar. I'll switch back to the gallery. And then to the right of our viewer, we have our nodes. Now, if you watch the chapters on Fusion, these nodes are similar to the Fusion nodes in that each node has a job and they flow from left to right, and you can connect them together in a flowchart. The difference is that while each node basically does one thing in Fusion, a node in the color page can do a bunch of different stuff. I like to think of it as just a group of color corrections, and anything that you change in the color palettes down here, which we'll get into in a second, all of that lives in a node. We'll talk about that more as we go through this chapter. But for now, you can kind of just not worry about this. Just know it's there. In the middle of our interface, we have our clips. These are just thumbnails for each shot that's in your project. So every time that there's a cut on the timeline, it will make a new thumbnail here. And you can quickly go in between your shots just by clicking on the thumbnail. This is a nice visual way to go through your project. Down below the clips, we have the timeline, and this one looks a lot like the one in the cut page, actually. The only difference is that you can't make any edits here. This is really just a visual way for you to see where things are laid out in the timeline, how long they are, and all of that. This one is really more like a mini map kind of idea. I usually don't have much use for this, and so I almost always just turn it off. So we can go to the upper right-hand corner of our screen, right here where it says timeline in white. I can click that and close the timeline. That just gives us a little bit more screen space because we don't really need it. All this stuff below the clips and the timeline, these are called our color palettes. These are all of the different controls that are available to change the colors of an image. If you're not familiar with color correction, this probably looks really wild. Like there's a ton to look at here. And in some ways, yes, there is a lot of stuff, but the good news is you don't need to know every single little button and knob. You can get by with just knowing a couple of these things. And I mean, you can grade whole projects. You can do basically anything that you want to do, just knowing 3 or 4 different controls. We're going to get into the specifics of all of the things that you need to know down here to get started. But as a general overview, we have these little buttons up here, and these will switch out the contents of various palettes. Now, on my screen, there are 3 different palettes here. There's this left palette, the middle palette, and the right palette. And depending on your screen size, these might be condensed into 2 or even 1 palette. And all of these little buttons here might switch out one kind of big bottom window. If that's happening, it's totally okay. Everything works the same way. The easiest way to navigate is just whatever I'm working on, look right above it, and whatever's white, that is the window that I'm on. So the defaults here are the color wheels, the custom curves, and the keyframes. And a lot of these will do kind of the same thing. For instance, you have controls to make the image brighter or darker in the color wheels, and you also have them in the curves. And there's a lot of stuff like that in the color page. Over here on the right side, we have our keyframes, and this is just a little timeline that shows anything that's animated. And so if you animate anything, you'll see that kind of graphed out here. And behind that is our color scopes. These are pretty important. This is a visual graph of the different colors in the image that isn't based on just looking at the image and kind of trusting your eyes to decide what colors things are. It's the actual kind of data about what color things are. And we'll get into this in a little bit. Another really cool part of the color interface is the lightbox. In the upper right-hand corner, if we click lightbox here, this brings up a whole new window and it lays out all of your shots kind of in a grid. And this is a great way to view a ton of shots all at once. We only have a few shots in this little demo project, but you know, if you have 1,000 or 1,200 shots, you can line them all out really small and you can visually look at all of their thumbnails and group shots together, copy and paste color corrections in between them. Very helpful. So a good thing to know is there. And that's a basic overview of the color interface.